Imagine you're walking home on a foggy evening in Brittany, France, and you hear the creaking of a cart behind you. You turn around and see a hooded figure holding a scythe, guiding a wagon filled with corpses. No, you're not in a horror movie. You've just encountered the Ankou, one of the most terrifying legends in Breton folklore. And what if I told you that even today, some Bretons refuse to go out at night for fear of meeting him? Stay until the end of this video because I'm going to reveal why this centuries-old legend continues to fascinate and frighten, and how it has inspired films, books, and even modern traditions you might never have suspected. The Ankou isn't just a story told to keep children quiet. It's much more than that. In Breton folklore, the Ankou represents death's servant, not death itself, which is an important distinction. Unlike the Grim Reaper we all know, the Ankou has a very specific origin and established rules. He's described as being the last person to die in the month of December, and sometimes the first person to die of the year becomes his assistant to help him with his task. So imagine the pressure if you're the last to die in December. Not only do you kick the bucket, but you also get handed a full-time job for eternity. It's like death created its own unpaid internship system. Anatole Lebras, in his collection of legends, La Légende de la Mort, the Legend of Death, describes him as death's worker, and specifies that the last person to die in each parish becomes that parish's Ankou for the following year. But where exactly does this legend come from? The Ankou draws its roots from ancient Celtic tradition. The ancient Celts didn't fear death, since for them, it represented the beginning of a better life. Yet even with this positive vision of death, the Ankou remains a figure that inspires terror. Christianized Bretons conceived of death in the same way, as something simple and natural, but they were afraid of the Ankou. This is where all the complexity of this character lies. He's not death itself, but its representative on Earth, which paradoxically makes him more human and therefore more frightening. He has responsibilities, quotas to fill, and most importantly, he can make mistakes or be negotiated with in certain stories. If you enjoy this kind of content about legends and mythologies that have shaped our cultures, don't hesitate to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. We still have plenty of fascinating stories to explore together. Now, let's talk about the Ankou's appearance, because descriptions vary according to Breton regions, which makes this legend even richer. He's generally described as a gloomy man dressed in a dark cape, often wearing a black hat, but that's just the basic version. In some regions, he appears as a skeleton, in others as a very tall, thin man with long white hair. His scythe is always present, but pay attention to the detail that matters. It's mounted backwards to cut souls. Sometimes he carries a shovel or even a hoe, but this inverted scythe remains his most characteristic and frightening attribute. The detail that constantly returns is his creaking cart drawn by emaciated horses. This cart is his work tool, his hearse, if you will. It makes a characteristic noise that inhabitants of the Breton countryside learn to recognize and fear. Some testimonies even report that the creaking of the cart can be heard from miles away. The Ankou goes by different names depending on the region. Ankou in Wales or Ankou in Cornwall. In Brittany, the Ankou is also nicknamed the Father of Anguish, or Delanken. These regional variations show how much this legend has adapted to different Celtic communities. The Ankou is part of Lower Brittany's mythology from the 17th century, in the regions of Quimper, Vannes, Tréguier, and Saint-Paul-de-Léon. Each region had its own specificities concerning the Ankou. In some areas, he was considered more lenient, sometimes agreeing to negotiate or give delays. In others, he was merciless and strictly followed the orders he received from above. One of the most fascinating stories concerns the rules the Ankou must follow. Legend has it that the Ankou waits in each house to claim the life of the first living being that enters, whether it's an animal or an egg about to hatch. This is why in the Breton town of Quimperlé, it's traditional to sacrifice a rooster and spread its blood to protect the house. These traditions show that the Ankou wasn't just a story, but a belief that really influenced people's daily lives. This influence can still be felt today in certain Breton villages, where elders avoid going out on certain nights, particularly in winter when fog falls. They know that statistically there's no danger, but generations of oral transmission have anchored this fear in the collective unconscious. The most intriguing aspect of the Ankou is his complex relationship with social justice. Unlike other death figures who strike blindly, the Ankou is often presented as a social equalizer, as the maxim engraved on certain representations says, "Death strikes everyone equally, without distinction of power or wealth." This egalitarian dimension partly explains why the legend has endured. In a society where inequalities were glaring, the Ankou represented the only force capable of putting everyone back on equal footing. The local lord and the poorest peasant were treated the same way by the Ankou. It was almost reassuring in its terror. Anatole Lebraz's work in the 19th century was crucial for preserving this tradition. He collected songs and folk tales from Armorican Brittany and composed his collection La Légende de la Mort, a legacy of funeral vigils, and true testimony of a tradition at the crossroads of two worlds. Without his documentation work, many of these stories would have disappeared with the urbanization and modernization of Brittany. But the Ankou didn't content itself with staying in folk tales. It made a remarkable breakthrough in modern media, and that's where it gets really interesting. La Charrette Fantôme, The Phantom Carriage, by Julien Duvivier, released in 1939, constitutes one of the most striking cinematic adaptations of this legend. This French film, starring Pierre Fresnay and Marie Belle, masterfully transposes the Ankou's universe to the screen. It should be noted that Duvivier was inspired by Victor Sjöström's 1921 Swedish film of the same name, itself adapted from Selma Lagerlöf's novel, The Phantom Carriage. The Ankou's influence on cinema doesn't stop there. Several recent productions have been inspired by it, notably L'Ankou, L'Enfant et les Brigands, which presents itself as a modern reinterpretation of traditional Ankou tales through equestrian arts and the cinematic language of Italian westerns. Imagine a western with the Ankou as the main character. That's exactly the kind of cultural fusion that shows the vitality of this legend. But the Ankou has also significantly marked comic books. The L'Ankou album from Spirou and Fantasio, created by Fournier in 1977, remains one of the most memorable adaptations of the legend in the ninth art. What's fascinating about this album is that there exists a Breton translation under the title An Ankou, released in 1978, making it one of the rare Spirou comic books translated into this language. The album plunges our heroes into the heart of mysterious Brittany, where the Ankou becomes a character in its own right in the plot, mixing modernity and ancestral traditions. Breton music hasn't escaped the Ankou's influence either. The group Tri Yann, emblematic of the Breton folk scene, immortalized the legend in their song Hanterdro Macabre as early as 1976 on their album La Découverte ou l'Ignorance, Discovery or Ignorance. This musical adaptation transforms ancestral terror into a macabre dance, creating an atmosphere that's both festive and disturbing, perfectly fitting the Breton spirit. The artistic representations of the Ankou aren't limited to cinema. We find the Ankou in multiple sculptures, notably at Plumilio in Saint-Mio Parish Church, or at the Jacobins Museum in Morlaix. These sculpted representations, often dating back several centuries, testify to the importance this figure had in Breton society of the time. What's fascinating is how the Ankou continues to inspire contemporary creators. Breton filmmakers still launch crowdfunding campaigns today to adapt the legend to modern cinema. Maxime Le Guillou, a Nantes-based director, launched a participatory fundraiser to finance his new film project, L'Ankou, a horror film parody. This parodic approach shows how popular culture appropriates and reinterprets ancient legends. The Ankou becomes by turns a terrifying figure, tragic character, or even a source of humor, depending on the angle chosen by creators. The literary adaptation of these legends has also found new breath. Contemporary authors revisit traditional tales by anchoring them in our era. They ask interesting questions. How would the Ankou, adapt to the age of smartphones and GPS? Can he follow someone who moves constantly? These questions may seem absurd, but they reveal how much this legend remains alive in the collective imagination. The video game universe has also remarkably seized upon the Ankou. In 2023, French studio Alchemy Games released Ankou, an action roguelike game where the player literally embodies the Ankou in his mission to guide lost souls. The game mixes exploration, combat against demons, and resource collection, transforming the terrifying figure into a video game hero. It's a perfect example of how ancient legends find new life in contemporary media. Board games haven't been left out either. Several creators have developed immersive games around the legend, like Ankou by Celtic Tales, where players embody villagers struggling to save their community from the sinister figure. Even in the online gaming universe, the Ankou appears as a special role in certain variants of the werewolf game, where he can continue voting from the graveyard after his death. The influence of the Ankou goes beyond even the boundaries of entertainment. In certain Breton regions, tourism companies organize nighttime walks following the Ankou's traces. These routes allow visitors to discover places where apparitions have been reported and to hear testimonies transmitted from generation to generation. There's something profoundly modern in this approach. At a time when everything is accelerating and traditions seem to be fading, the Ankou offers an anchor in a strong local history. It's intangible heritage that gives these territories a unique identity. Breton festivals also integrate the Ankou figure into their programming. We see street performances where the Ankou wanders among the public, creating an atmosphere that's both festive and slightly disturbing. These events allow the legend to be transmitted to younger generations, while dusting it off. This intergenerational transmission is crucial because it ensures the legend's sustainability. Grandparents who still tell Ankou stories to their grandchildren maintain a millennial oral tradition alive. Even if today's children are less impressed than their elders, they integrate these stories into their cultural baggage. The Ankou also represents an interesting case study for understanding how legends evolve. Initially, a purely terrifying figure, he tends to become more complex in modern interpretations. He's sometimes presented as a melancholy character, constrained by his role, almost sympathetic in his eternal solitude. This evolution reflects our changing relationship with death. While our ancestors lived in daily intimacy with mortality, we've largely evacuated it from our daily lives. The Ankou then becomes a way to reconnect with this universal reality, but in a less brutal way than in the past. What makes the Ankou particularly fascinating is his ability to adapt to each era's concerns while keeping his essence. In the 17th century, he embodied fears linked to epidemics and famines. In the 19th century, he represented equality before death in a very hierarchical society. Today, he can symbolize our contemporary anxieties about time acceleration and loss of meaning. The legend's future seems assured as long as there are creators to reinvent it and storytellers to transmit it. New technologies even offer new possibilities. Podcasts, video games, virtual reality. Imagine an immersive experience where you could find yourself face to face with the Ankou in the Breton moor on a stormy night. This legend also reminds us of the importance of regional folklore in building our collective identity. In a globalized world, these local stories offer precious cultural specificity. The Ankou is a piece of Brittany that resembles nothing else, a particularity that enriches world heritage. So the next time you're walking in Brittany and you hear a strange creaking in the fog, you might know who's hiding behind that sound. And even if your reason tells you it's probably just a perfectly normal cart, a small part of you might wonder if the Ankou isn't making his nightly rounds. The Ankou continues to haunt imaginations and fascinate legend enthusiasts like you, who stayed until the end of this video. If this dive into Breton folklore pleased you, tell me in the comments what regional legend you'd like me to explore in a future video. And don't forget to share this video with those who appreciate stories that give you chills, even in broad daylight.